Hello and welcome to this human rights conversation. Let's move on to our second segment. For those who are politically active in the United Kingdom, the summer holiday period is followed by the political conference season. Will you be taking part in September?
Yes, I will. I'll be, as a member of the Labour Party, I will be focused on that. So my colleague, Paul Dark, who I think you've done podcasts with in the past, Paul and I are co-hosting 2 sessions at the Labour Party conference, fringe events, which will be discussing issues around disability policy. We have a range of speakers, quite exciting, who will talk about these issues. And we have one which is part of the Labour Party fringe event, and one which is part of the Momentum group, which is a contingent which supports the progression of left ideas within the Labour Party.
You'll be hosting a meeting to discuss disability rights issues, of course, with the esteemed Dr. Paul Dark. You were an advisor to the coalition government. Where are political parties getting it right on disability rights issues, and where are they getting it catastrophically wrong?
I think the emphasis is on what they're getting it wrong rather than what they're getting what is going well. I think all mainstream parties have not necessarily advanced their thinking considerably on the topic of disability. We want to see how disability is not dependent on the economic objectives of the state, and yet many political groups do that. They tie disability to welfare and the issue around how we want to protect the infrastructures that we have in place at the expense of further marginalising disabled people in the community. So I think there's a need to push for more radical alternatives to supporting disabled people to be part of the education system, access health services, access employment if people can and want to do that, and access assessment procedures which provide the right level of support. So there is a radical overhaul that's needed to address disabled people's position within society in the UK, and none of the parties are doing that. And I think what is most telling is when you have mainstream political parties which will say things like, we want to end the bias towards inclusive education, which basically means we want to have a segregated education system for disabled people. And you will run that as your manifesto campaign message, and people will accept that. I think it shows how there is this disconnect between disabled activist demands and rights for social justice and the non-disabled community in recognising the marginalisation encountered by disabled people. And the political parties are not doing enough to address that. But equally, disabled people are not having opportunities to engage in these political parties. And I think we've recognised how other groups, other cohorts within society have struggled to engage proactively with political parties. And whilst disability is one example of those groups which have been distanced, I think we can use disability and the topic of accessibility to illustrate the need to have a different approach to political party structures, political party decision making, of trying to bring more people to be included in political parties. And this is why I'm fascinated, and this is deliberately why Paul and I wanted to have a session with at the World Transformed conference, part of the coming out of the Momentum group, because it is an opportunity to see how things are being done differently, to welcome people who have not necessarily been very political before. So to summarise what I've said, the problems facing disabled people are systemic across all political parties, and the vision that's being articulated towards disabled people's inclusion within society, I think, is very, very woolly and doesn't go far enough whatsoever to address the kind of systemic discriminatory practices that disabled people experience.
You mentioned there about one political party suggesting that it wished to end inclusive education. Surely that was done under the guise that it would be benevolent and useful. What was your understanding of this policy? What was the alternative that they were proposing? And could it be seen as being benevolent and useful?
So it was a Conservative manifesto under Cameron, and the idea, David Cameron, and the idea was to say there has been a tendency to have a bias towards inclusive education. And actually, from their point of view, from the Conservative point of view, there is merit in having a segregated education system. There is a desire to have a segregated education system, and therefore we will then remove this bias and fund the segregated approach.
Okay, so let me argue for the devil on this one. Couldn't that be an argument that says we will target resources at people with impairments so that they get the quality education that they need, that will enable them to progress and to take advantage of all the opportunities that are available to them? Isn't it possible to market that policy as not being regressive in the way in which you suggest?
Well, again, if you look at the data and the research that comes out of segregated education systems, the idea that disabled people have opportunities to explore aspects of education is much reduced. There is an overwhelming emphasis towards the medicalisation of the students, of having their medical needs met, of primarily looking at their health needs, and you're also creating a culture which says disabled people should be segregated from the education system. And that's built on the desire of saying disabled people are a disruption, so therefore you remove them from the so-called mainstream. And there are numerous other issues around that as well, but we haven't got time to talk about that. But the problem is that a political party will put that as a manifesto statement. They may get support and backing from their political party members, but and maybe in the people in the public as well. But what it doesn't do is try to, in any way, to explore the systemic issues which has not only created the desire for having a segregated education system, but also recognise that the education system that we have at the moment is not inclusive for many different social groups. And other political parties don't necessarily respond to that very well, because they are too at fault of trying to of not going far enough in addressing the barriers encountered by disabled people. So this is why I would be, even though I am on the left, I am very critical of the left of the left's approach to addressing disability issues, and they have not gone far enough whatsoever. And the left has a problem with the way it portrays disabled people. I think since the neoliberal era, we have seen the rights, under kind of Major and Thatcher in the UK, the approach to disability was, they're a problem, but we will wrap it up in the notion of compassion and say, well, you need so much caring and responsibility that we will move you away. We will segregate you for your own wealth, for your own safety and security. And this is why you had disabled people being placed in institutions of having segregated education systems and so on. What you have now with the right and with the Conservatives at the moment in their offer to disabled people is one of saying, we literally do not care about you. Because if you're not an economic success story, i.e. if you do cost too much in order to actually gain access to employment and be productive to society from their point of view, then if you can't do that, then what is the point? We have no interest in you. And this is why they take their approach to social security for disabled people, of supporting disabled people into work, in supporting disabled people to access education system. Higher education has been so woeful, it demonstrates that they have no interest in supporting disabled people unless the group that they are trying to support is going to be productive in terms of what we consider to be productive in a 21st century neoliberal society. But the left is not doing anything to try to address that. And this is why I go back to the issue of the vision, because there is no vision. There is this reactionary agenda by the left to say, well, we want to stop what is going on, but then they don't offer anything else as an alternative, and doesn't go far enough to address the kind of concerns and issues raised by disabled activists and the social movements.
Is the problem of disability rights politics in the UK and elsewhere across Europe the result of the financial crash and the era of austerity that the financial crash unleashed? Is that the central problem, or does it go back further than that?
Oh no, it goes back much further than that. So again, the response to disabled people's social status and providing support to disabled people goes further beyond the crash and goes back numerous years as to how disabled people were supported to be part of the community. And this is where you're seeing great advancements made by the disabled people's movement to push for things like self-directed support, and rather than having large-scale organizations providing support which is rigid and controlled by a certain framework, giving disabled people opportunities to dictate how they want to receive support and how they want to access it. You saw, pushback against wanting disabled people to have more of a presence within higher education, having opportunities to gain access to work. The problem is that as we have shifted politically, as we have shifted more and more to the right, the discussion around disabled people's presence has been one of further scrutiny, of blame for problems within society, and that any advancements that are wanting to be made by the disabled people's community has to be driven by the economic sustainability of the demands. So this is the problem that I looked at in my thesis, because you have activists now growing up thinking that, well, if I want to campaign or create change, I can't do it on the basis of creating an alternative vision for the way society should function. I should offer something so concrete and precise that that is going to ride the wave of any concerns for economic instability. Because what happens then is our demands become a reflection of the world that we live in, rather than demands being an argument for a different way to live our life. And this is where we've seen the kind of the direction of activism going for many years. This is why I have a problem with the left, and the left in the wider sense of offering a vision, because it's just going into that reactionary status. But there has been fascinating research coming out showing that since the coalition period, since the rapid acceleration of austerity, the media portrayal of disability has increased, with the terms of using the term scrounger, of using the term fraudulent benefits, of using such ideas. So when disabled people and disabled activists try to campaign, they are fighting against the narrative, the wrongful narrative, and the hostile narrative which is being imposed upon them, that says, well, whatever you really want, deep down, secretly, you are just exploiting the current welfare system. So then the people that you're trying to convince to join you in this kind of pushing for the demands of social justice, you also have to try and defend yourself to them and say, I am not how the media portrays me to be. And this is what's really damaging at the moment. And this is why institutions like the BBC are also to blame as well for the way they have portrayed disability, or the way that mainstream media goes around trying to tackle issues of disability. Before this podcast, we talked a little bit about comedy. The problem is when you do have programs being made which is supposed to be an opportunity to highlight the concerns of being disabled in the 21st century, they don't touch on anything that we talk about. They touch on issues around opportunities to have better jobs, opportunities to have more of a presence on news or in the media or on fictional stories. They don't have any opportunity to say, actually, why is the education system? Why do we accept a segregated education system? Why do we accept the idea that segregation is useful in some areas of society to keep one group away from other groups when it comes to disability? None of that gets discussed. But then the media gets celebrated for saying, oh, you had a wonderful documentary on disabled people trying to navigate the interview process of job interviews. And it's just pointless. It's utter meaningless, because the systemic issues that we've talked about continuously through all our podcasts don't get highlighted.
I think what you've done in that answer, Miro, is just identify exactly the scale of the problem. It seems to me that for the left and for other progressive political organisations, the debate is also always framed by the parties of the right. This desire to offer something that is concrete and rooted in a rational response. It's always a rational response to the arguments put forward by the right. And I think this is if we were to just widen our conversation, the malaise in politics. I said at the start of the segment that it's conference season in the UK. Well, that conference season applies to fewer and fewer people. The Corbyn's Labour Party has seen a surge in membership, but that is the exception that proves the rule. Most political parties are on the decline in Western democracies. Their memberships are ageing. So, and I think the reason for that is because people they fail to see a difference between these political parties, particularly on the issue of the economy. So from your point of view, given that this is a human rights conversation, given that I think we would both agree that it's important that people are politically engaged because it's through democratic politics that society can be improved. How do you see political parties reviving their fortunes?
Well, I think one way to do it is look at the internal party structures and think about how democracy plays a part within that. And there's been numerous amounts of literature that has come out to explore the various kind of structures, institutions, the membership processes to gain, to entice people to join political parties. But the problem is when you have the domination of financial wealth within the parties, i.e., if you pay us this amount of money, you can gain access to talk to this parliamentarian or prospective candidate, or if you're just going after the corporate sector and you're dismissing the majority of the working class communities of having their voice within the party, then you're getting to a situation where we can see internally how the parties are not democratic at all. And I think there needs to be an approach taken to think about, well, what makes a party democratic in its internal aspects, and that is around how members can influence the leadership process, how they can recall candidates, how the candidates also have to recognise that they are there on behalf of the party, not on behalf of their own career. And I think there's around, what basic rights do people get when they join a political party? And this goes back to my topic before. If we look at some of the, I think there was a scholar, Weber, this year, who produced research for looking at exploring how the political parties within Germany operate, and looking at how people join them. And she talked about how the issue around, you join your political party either on the incentives of what the membership offers you, or on the social economic model of what it will provide you in terms of your career and the skills that you may get from joining a party. And many people don't see what they get from a political party, so they don't want to join it. Again, you made the point around they don't see the difference between the parties. And the problem is that our political system is built on the idea that actually you're only realistically going to have a choice between two groups. And the way that some of these groups go about operating, of just looking for the financial wealth of the corporate sector, means that they can have it means that they can go so far away from the political spectrum that they will just operate on the basis of what the market wants the political enterprises, what the political bodies want them to do. So the markets then dictate, or the corporations dictate, what the political parties should be doing, as opposed to the members on the ground. And this is where I think we need to have some attention. So parties themselves need to focus on the internal democratic structures, and we need to think a bit more about how, for the everyday experience, we politicize people's experiences, and recognize that actually the answers to some of the issues that we're facing need to be discussed, need to have that space to allow for reflection and debate on these issues. Because political parties shouldn't be about having a space where you are being taught or you're just discussing the political ideology of that party. What you should be looking at is how the political ideology of the party is reflected in everyday life. And that is what members should be doing when they're trying to discuss the issues with potential voters. But that's not what I'm seeing at the moment. And I'm seeing very traditional ways of trying to engage in political meetings, in local political branches. And this is why I'm fascinated by some of the opportunities that are coming out from the likes of Momentum as to how they go about trying to engage with people who've never had interest in politics before, or more importantly, didn't equate their own personal experiences with the wider political and historical context of the issues that they're encountering.
Many people would agree that political parties across Western democracies have been captured by corporate interests at the expense of individual members. But I think also there's something else that's going on. Political parties no longer reflect class or group interests. Has human rights theory and the promotion of individual rights and responsibilities been an accomplice for this understanding over the last 40 or 50 years?
I don't think there is enough emphasis placed on the social rights and the human rights agendas within the political parties. And I say that because I think the political parties that we have now are so consumed by their own collective survival that actually you don't have any space to debate some of these issues that we're talking about.
People would disagree with that, Miro. They would say that political parties now talk endlessly about the rights of people from different ethnic minorities, talk endlessly about the need for greater gender equality, and they're obsessed with issues to do with who individuals go to bed with. They would say that these parties have been taken over by identity politics, which moves away from our understanding of political parties as being vehicles to promote class and group interests.
No, but I think they do that because they know that there is a movement to try to raise some of these issues. The problem we have is that this doesn't then transition into specific recommendations or legislative frameworks that will be introduced, or different policies which will then try to tackle some of the issues that we're talking about. There's a lot of rhetoric that's used. So, for example, you know that you're going to get a whoop and a cheer if you come on and talk about the importance of disabled people, but you don't get any further than that. There's no recommendations actually placed on the table. There's no in-depth analysis as to why we want to explore the issue of a different social security system or a different process of supporting people to engage in the education system. Because what happens then is, as the messages get further and further adopted by the party mechanisms and the party machine, it then becomes wrapped in the economic viability kind of formula. So at the point of trying to become a demand for the party to campaign on, the problem then is it is lost all of its roots in what it was originally about. And the reason why they've gone down the route of saying, well, we will only do this on the basis of economic sustainability and emphasize that more than anything else, is because they know that it would be political suicide for the party to take a different approach. And what I'm saying is, we've had so many years of those kind of conversations that we don't have, and I dread to say the politics of hope, because nobody wants to step outside of that arena to say, actually, can we do things a little bit more radical? Can we be a little bit different in the way that we've done, in the way that we've set the agenda, in the way of what we've proposed for society? People have lost hope because they've seen austerity and they've seen neoliberalism as the only way to continue with society, with societal change and with the way that society develops and is organised. And we don't have the option. And the problem is that the other political parties, because there is this idea of collective survival amongst all of them, and the idea that actually all of them are mixing together and attending different groups, and you've got now in the UK political system people saying we want to create a new party of the centre mixed up of all these different groups for their own collective survival. What you've got then is no opportunity to actually be visionary and have discussions about what I would refer to as the alternative future, or the alternative futures in terms of plurality. Because again, there's an importance here that when groups in opposition talk about we can have a different way of doing things, it doesn't mean that there is a utopia. It doesn't mean that there is one prescribed method to go down, which is going to be the alternative. It's to say that actually we want to debate and discuss and have that time to reflect on what are the alternatives, plural, options that can be available to us, which say that actually the way things are at the moment doesn't have to continue.
All right, there's a lot of substance to what you say there, but there is an alternative point of view that says political parties now are delighted to have conversations about essentially personal issues because they can't have conversations about economic theory, which used to be the great dividing line for political parties in previous generations. And why might that be? Well, because you've highlighted it. There is this sense that there is no alternative to the great neoliberal adventure. There is no alternative to globalization. And the left, allowing the right to frame the debate, has no alternative to propose apart from quantitative easing, which nobody understands. So that's the reason why they're happy to, scramble for votes in these essentially personal issues. Isn't that the problem? Progressive politics only can lead the debate and frame the narrative if it has something serious and coherent to say about the economic order of events.
I think that part of that is the case, but again, I would want to see a separation of social justice, which is predominantly being as characterized by the left in terms of how it's operated, one of solidarity and social justice, of not creating this formula where social justice or social rights are dependent on the economic and political objectives, and that is, I think, is the problem within this. Because you have a problem whereby the political groups will campaign and champion social rights, but will then lose that as soon as they get into the serious agendas that could win them the election. And the problem is that then people become dissatisfied because they've been provided with a politics of hope, which is then being lost, and they've also equated this idea that a success at a political level is the same as being is rooted in the same kind of agendas created by the corporate sector. And this is where we've seen, and this is why we have such a relationship between the corporations and the political bodies. So I think the mechanism to address this is to campaign on a platform of social justice, is to actually explain to people that when you are incredibly annoyed and frustrated and marginalized, and you are blaming it on certain groups, is to recognize, actually, why would you blame it on those groups? But is there an alternative way to look at the current picture, and then to carry that forward in the entirety of the campaign? The problem we have at the moment is that there is not enough people who speak from that position are being allowed the opportunities and the platform to actually address that, because the party in themselves are also their worst enemy. So, for example, if you look in America, there are numerous analysts that would have said the way that Bernie Sanders was treated by the Democratic Party was done so in a way to protect what the Democratic Party had become. They were so consumed with keeping it the way it was that they were okay with running the risk of losing a candidate who was extremely popular amongst the working class communities in order to protect the existence of their party, in order to make sure that it survives in the way it has been through the Obama and Clinton eras. And this is the same that you have now for the political parties in the UK, is that there is this mass around trying to keep it the same way it has been and not offer the space to have any alternative options. And this is why I talked before around the internal party processes. This is what needs to change, because we want to see more people coming from these social movements who are also historians, economists, people involved in the various different sectors within society, but are primarily driven from the point of view of social justice. And when we have more opportunities for those people to engage in the political structures, and we get away from this idea that the party in itself is consumed by collective survival, that's when I think we'll be able to actually create some radical alternatives to what's being offered at the moment.
It's interesting, when I hear you speak, Miro, that sounds to me like the blueprint of progressive parties in Western democracies, and it's failed miserably. The politics now is dominated by the easy propositions of the populists and the nationalists, and by the iron laws of neoliberal globalization. The left has nothing to say. Progressive politics has nothing to say when it comes to economic theory, and my argument is, in vacating economic theory and vacating the discussion around our economic priorities, there is no wind in the sails of the politics of hope that you mention, because you can see in many Western democracies that by promoting this social agenda, by promoting this politics of hopes, it creates a massive backlash. And I'm going to argue that if political parties want to revive their fortunes, left or right, it can only be through an engagement in real economic policy. It cannot be through a discussion on what are essentially personal and private matters.
Well, I think you have to have the balance between what are the basic rights that people should have access to and how to get them met. But for me, it is promoting it on the basis of why should people have those basic rights, and recognizing that people are frustrated with what they've got at the moment. But that isn't the problem of other marginalized communities, which is the case that many groups, which is the case of what many groups take. What I would say is, and I think that this is the character of the left and its problem, and it was seen during the EU referendum, and I think it will be seen as other countries across Europe start to debate their membership to the EU. Is that you had the vision of, which I think was misguided, of those who wanted to leave the European Union, and they offered alternative ways of creating prosperity, and whatnot. But those who wanted to remain were focused solely on saying, well, actually, what you're being offered is nonsense. You must stick with what you have, as opposed to, which is what I would have wanted, is to offer a vision for why you want a Europe like, which is one built on solidarity, on community, and what you can get from the institutions and the mechanisms.
If you allow me to jump in, the left was not credible when it made that argument, because the left had spent most of the previous 30 or 40 years demonising the European Union as being the vehicle for neoliberalism in Britain and elsewhere.
Well,
you could hardly make the case then that it's also the guarantor of social rights and freedoms.
No, but what I was saying was, I didn't say the left, that was the view of Remain, but what I said are those who were on the side of Remain, which was a mixture of numerous different positions politically. But my point is that those who want to create the alternative come from the point of view of trying to react to what the other side is offering. And that, I think, is where we fall down, because we get so consumed in that reaction to the current agendas and current crises that we then don't offer the space afterwards to actually think about what do we want moving forward. And the EU issue, I think, was reflective of people not understanding the different infrastructures within the EU. So again, there's a difference between the parliamentarians and the economists who were saying different things at different points during the economic crisis and whatnot. But I get this. But my fundamental point is one of, if as positions of opposition that you formulate around the idea of, I am just reacting to what the other side is saying, as opposed to not focusing primarily on the vision and offering more people to come through to build that vision, then you'll ultimately fail. And this is where the left is at the moment, and this is why it needs to consider these messages coming out of the social movements as a way of saying, well, actually, if we start bringing this all together and we start bringing in the communities which feel exploited and marginalized, that don't connect with these groups, that is how we're going to create the change that is needed, not the current approach which is being taken at the moment.
Okay, I hear what you say, but there is a different analysis that says that the left politics is doomed because of two key things. One, because it has vacated the space where economic policy is discussed and credible alternatives are proposed. The left just does not have anything to say when it comes to that, as far as I can see. And secondly, I'm going to argue that human rights theory has worsened the position of the left, because human rights theory has led to the triumph of the individual understanding of his or her place in society, in the world. That human rights theory has talked constantly for the last 13-40 years about the role, the rights and the responsibilities of the individual. And this has undermined our understanding of our place in the world based on class and group. And the left has relied on class and group as a way to promote progressive politics, with the decimation of those ideas, the idea of class and group, the left has nowhere to go. And that's why it has to rely on scrambling for votes on issues which are essentially private. And more people are coming to this understanding that these issues are private. And that is the reason why politics now seems to be, and it will only be temporary because there's always going to be movement. This is why the right, the new right, the populist right, is making so much headway. Its very success is a reaction to this obsession with identity politics.
What I would take from what you're saying is I would focus primarily on this relationship between social rights and economic viability. And if you muddle the two together and you make one dependent on the other, then I think this is where we get caught.
But that, if you allow me to jump in, you don't need to be discussing economic theory solely on the basis of who is economically productive and who isn't. In my political lifetime, politics was about who controls the means of distribution, production and exchange. That is not exactly the same argument. I can see where you're going, and I can understand from a disability rights point of view why this conversation focused essentially on economics is dangerous. But I think until there is an articulate proposition from the left that says there is an alternative to neoliberal economics, the left has nowhere to go. And all of these issues, politics of hope, identity politics, they will all fall into that hole-marked political death because the left has nothing to say about how we're going to generate enough money for people to live in a decent way, how we're going to move away from what we discussed off camera, which was the precarious nature of modern life, how we're going to have a vision for society, because that vision of society has to be underpinned by some kind of economic success. The left wins at periods of economic plenty. It doesn't win in periods of austerity.
And the reason for that, from my point of view, is that there is no focus or space to discuss how do we judge the worthiness of the people within society. And this is where I think the left has to move to. It is a point of questioning currently, through our current structures, how do we place worth on one group as opposed to another, or one individual as opposed to another, and what is the point of our systems and structures that we have currently. Now, if you debate that and you offer, not necessarily, maybe not even an alternative, but you offer a space to say, stop accepting what is being provided to us by the right for so many years as a way of almost like its truth, in a way of saying, this is what is the point of the education system. There is a point of, what is the point of being at work? If you don't debate those issues, then you can't have any opportunity to create an alternative. But the point that must come from the left is that the starting principle is that all life is worthy, and that there is no justification for any segregation of anybody or for the treatment of anybody on the basis of their individual. And this is where I agree that there needs to be a move towards the collective. I still think that you need to have space to recognise intersectionality, but intersectionality must transition into the traditional issues that we've discussed beforehand around the issue of the aspects that come out of class, the aspects that come out of engaging in public services, of having basic needs met. The problem is that there is no way at the moment of formulating these problems, of asking what are the problems within the current ways of working, within the current ways of being within society. And until a political body does that, then there is an opportunity to create the change that is required.
And on that note, Miro Griffiths, thank you. That brings us to the end of this human rights conversation. Join us again for another conversation next month. Thanks, Miro.
Cheers.